All right, let us bring in my friend, CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett. So, Major, the president had a bullish tone for much of this speech. He repeatedly blamed former President Joe Biden. I want to play a bit of that sound for you, and let's talk about it.
Sure.
11 months ago, I inherited a mess, and I'm fixing it. This happened during a Democrat administration, and it's when we first began hearing the word affordability. This is what the Biden administration allowed to happen to our country.
So, Major, we in the media, we spend a lot of time fact-checking the president of the United States.
Sure.
There are a lot of things that the president does that are, for some people, outrageous, and we talk about those things, which we're going to do a little bit later. But I just want to remind our viewers, to set up this conversation, the 3 rules that the late Roy Cohn, the lawyer who President Trump Roy Cohn was sort of President Trump's mentor. Young people should Google who this guy was. But he always drilled into the president's head when he was a young man in the 70s, 80s. 3 things: always attack, never defend; admit nothing, defend everything; and number 3, claim victory and never admit defeat. So when we talk about the strategy here, when the president's giving a speech or when he's putting up plaques that have questionable references to them, help me understand the strategy here.
For the president right now, he knows that he's put a lot of things in motion. His economic advisors keep telling him quite aggressively, 2026 is going to be a boom year for the economy. So he keeps promising that. He knows, because he can read polling data as well as anyone. He may disregard it. He may call it fake polling data, but he knows what the polling data is. The American public across the spectrum, even among Trump supporters, are not feeling bullish about the economy, and nearly as bullish as the president sounded last night. And independents and Democrats much more critical of the president. So he has lost ground on that. So the strategy is to say, look, we are going to have a great 2026 because of the things I did in 2025. You may not feel them yet, but they're going to be there. And look, the president is not surrounded by ignorant people. They know how to read data on economic projections. And they're looking at 4%, maybe 4.5% GDP growth, bigger job gains, more wage gains. If those things manifest, Vlad, and it's a very big if, but if they do, the president will then be able to say, I was resilient, I was criticized, I was mocked, I was basically going through a pattern I've experienced for 10 years in American politics where I'm right and everyone who criticizes me is wrong. That is a very big bet. I would say this, when I talk to Republicans, they know that their prospects in the midterm elections are dim now, and the only chance they have of reversing that pretty negative trend line is to have the American public appreciate the economy in a new and more bullish way, which is what the president tried to set in motion last night.
And yet, with all of that, and even with the idea that you are, even if you are losing, you're losing, the political message, the economic message, the immigration message, the president keeps doubling down. And so I wonder, because it's not as if other presidents haven't tried to tell us that things are better than we actually feel, right? And so President Biden did it. President Biden used to shout, too, when people asked him about the economy. But the question is, will voters, as they prepare to go to the polls, are they going to listen and believe what the president is saying, or what their wallets, their pocketbooks, their purses, the bills that they pay, what that shows? So one of the most persistent and clear messages in American politics is, and this has been especially true the last 15 or 20 years, statistics are things that politicians hold on to. Real experience and anecdotal evidence is what voters make their decisions on. What are they experiencing? What are their friends experiencing? What is their family experiencing? And that is through those trusted sources. As people have become less and less reliant upon and trusting in institutions, statistics just don't carry the weight that they used to. And that's true for independents, Democrats, and Republicans. And so every president, this one in particular, is up against that reality. And what people are conversing about, what they're experiencing, whether it's at the pump when they buy gas, in the grocery store, or, and this is really important, Vlad, what are they paying for services? If you look at the service economy inflation, that is even more persistent than grocery store or energy price inflation. So it's across a spectrum of ways people interact with the economy.
And that's what tells them how they're doing. Most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Most Americans buy down their paycheck within the first 48 hours of receiving it. That's how close most Americans live to the line of affordability. Now, that's a huge issue to deal with. There are a lot of structural matters, long-standing, that have contributed to that. President Trump wants to hypersimplify things. He is kind of an expert at hypersimplification, also exaggeration. It certainly worked for him. He's been reelected, president twice. That stands on its own as an accomplishment. But as the midterms approach, those underneath the president who are seeking reelection are going to have to look for ways, if this economy doesn't rebound, to not only describe it differently, but find ways to move away from the president and campaign on their own.
Okay, so let's talk about the one thing that is drawing the latest outrage from a lot of people, both on social media and just, man on the street, as we call them in the broadcast journalism industry. We've learned that the president has installed these partisan plaques in the White House. It's part of what he's calling the Presidential Walk of Fame. It includes digs at former President Biden, digs at former President Barack Obama, former President Bill Clinton, a little bit of praise for President Reagan, viewed through the prism of how President Reagan perhaps thought of then Donald Trump, businessman Donald Trump. So what is the message here? Because he's done this before on Truth Social, on social media. These kind of read like social media posts, in which he says, labels President Biden Sleepy Joe Biden, by far the worst American president in history. He calls Barack Obama the most divisive political figure in American history, I guess more than Andrew Johnson or Robert. I mean, there's so many people that could have that moniker that are not even in the modern era, Major.
Yes.
But what's he trying to do here?
Richard Nixon had an enemies list, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
He resigned from office. Andrew Jackson had lots of people who didn't think he was particularly unifying. So I've had the professional privilege, Vlad, of covering the White House for many administrations. The White House is a special place, just as Capitol Hill is a special place. The White House has always been regarded by presidents as shared space, part of a long-running story of American life in which they are temporary occupants. And whatever alterations they make to the White House, they make to slightly reflect their personality, the moment in time in which they occupy the White House, but they tread lightly because it is shared space and part of a long-running and continuous American story. In his second term, President Trump has shattered that idea entirely. It is his space, and he redesigns it to his satisfaction. Presidents are historic figures, but they're not historians. And this particular plaque procedure isn't about history. It's about partisan grievance and Trumpian social media trolling. It will not survive his presidency. Even a Republican who comes after him, should one come after him, I suspect will not keep these particular ornaments, and certainly no Democrat will. The next president, I believe, will try to revive that idea that the White House is shared space, not necessarily personalized partisan space. These plaques fit into that latter category.
Yeah, and I thought, Major, for me, I mean, with all the other things that he had inscribed on these plaques, and I also wondered who, I mean, the company that was doing the mechanics of writing these things down. I would just love to talk to the people who were responsible for that. But I also thought just within the walls of the White House, to put anywhere within the walls of the White House, the People's House, that an election in this country was the most corrupt ever in the history of this country, which he did in the inscription for Joe Biden, I thought was, for people who come and visit the White House to see that is sort of mind-boggling.
It's not only not historical, it's anti-historical. It is a straight-up presidential assertion that has no basis in fact. It's a lie. It's now been given semi-immortality for as long as he resides in the White House because there's a plaque, but it doesn't make it any less false.
Yeah, I'm sure Warren G. Harding.
And we are getting to the point, Vlad, where we may need to start calling that structure the Gold House. Look at it.
Yeah. The Rose Garden is gone. The East Wing is gone. It's being redone in the president's image.
And every new aspect of ornamentation is gold. Gold, not white, Not understated. It's gold. And if he wants to start calling it the Gold House, again, not shared space.
Yeah, an excellent point, Major. I suspect Warren G. Harding is breathing a little easier in his wherever he is tonight. Major, thank you very much.
The only president not viewed by someone as divisive was George Washington.
Yeah, George Washington. There's no better standard bearer than that. All right, Major, we'll see you tonight on The Takeout. Appreciate you as always, my friend.